Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar on how to create a risk-based testing strategy with simulators, emulators, and real devices, focusing on mostly the mobile testing strategy. Before we start, I just want to give a few housekeeping usual information to you guys. First one is you have the slides available in the resources panel. The recording will be shared with you a few days after this webinar. Feel free to ask any questions through the Q&A panel during the webinar. If we are not able to address all of them, we'll contact you after the webinar with responses. Lastly, if you have any technical issues, feel free to use the help button on your system, in your system. And with that, let's kick this webinar off. And with me, I have today Tzvika Shahaf, VP of Product Management at Perfecto. Hi, Tzvika.
Hi, Eran. Hello, everyone. Great to be here today.
So I'm obviously Eran Kinsbruner. I'm the Chief Evangelist and author at Perfecto. Tzvika, do you want to say a few words about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Eran. So my name is Tzvika. I'm leading the product team at Perfecto, working with digital enterprises across the world, helping those organizations to optimize their testing strategy, to fit it to the challenges that we see in the market today, and to really create a world-class user experience for their digital services. Again, excited to be here today and share some of the insights that we have on the digital space and how the combo of the real devices, the virtual devices together can allow organizations to scale their testing, to improve it, and to fit it to the dynamic changes in the market.
Definitely. Thank you, Tzvika. Thank you for joining. And I think that, Tzvika touched the debate, the question between using virtual platforms like emulators and simulators alongside mobile devices, real mobile devices. If you search through Google, you will find so many people asking the questions on how to balance between these two. Hopefully, after this webinar today, you will be armed with all the right strategies, considerations, and technical information as well on how to choose between these two platforms. So in this webinar, we're definitely going to talk about how both fit or complement the test automation coverage consideration for your mobile applications. We will define and show you the differences between iOS and Android virtual platforms, provide you a winning and proven strategy on testing both real and virtual platforms, and conclude with a demo of testing in parallel a mobile application across iOS simulators and Android emulators. And as mentioned earlier, Q&A is open to you throughout the webinar, and we'll address as many questions as we can at the end of this webinar. Before we begin, we have just made available a new ebook to the public, to the community, on how to create a mobile app testing strategy with virtual and real devices. You see here, this is the link to download the ebook. So this kind of complements this webinar. Feel free to get a free copy of this ebook during or after this webinar. So let's start. When we talk about test automation coverage, and for those of you who are covering Perfecto, myself and Tzvika, we are talking a lot about test automation coverage, and there is a clear reason why we are doing so. Obviously, when you do not have the proper coverage on both ends, test cases, test scenarios, and platforms, whether they are mobile or web permutations, you are losing. And you're losing because you're either risking inescape defects on a specific area in your product, or you're risking of testing your actual good test cases against the outdated lab or environment. So this is why there is no something that is more important than the other. These two are actually two sides of the same coin. And we often see organizations that are investing a lot in the right hand of having the right test scenarios. However, they are not always keeping up with a good strategy with, let's say, the mobile devices, whether they are real devices, virtual devices, the right operating systems, and so forth. So it's really important before we start to set the stage that these two kind of complement each other and they are part of the same test automation coverage strategy. Tzvika, you have any comment on that?
So the ability really to create the right balance between different types of testing, different type of, test cases. As you mentioned, Eran, it's really the two sides of the same coin, but the overall coverage plan should happen in an ongoing mode, should look at the customer kind of footprint of usage that we see, what type of permutations are hitting our service, and accordingly make sure that we spend respectfully the same amount of time or balance for the right platforms. As the market is pretty fragmented, as we see on the Android side, a lot of subversions that are still available, while we see on the iOS side, pretty quick, I would say, transition from one OS version, even on the minor level, to another, requires us to play this catch-up in an ongoing mode and take coverage consideration in any type of testing that we're running in our strategy.
Definitely, Tzvika. And if we want to connect that to the reality, so this is how the mobile landscape looks like today. On the Android, I would say it's even more fragmented than on the iOS, with I would say 4 to 5 different OS families covering the majority of this platform. I'm not even talking about the different devices like the Samsung, the Huawei's, and the others. So you're looking at a fragmented Android market. You're also looking at an iOS fragmented environment. And we're going to touch a bit also on the upcoming iOS 14 as well, which is going to cause even more disruption to this market. And why is that important? When you're looking at the considerations of real devices versus virtual devices, even before touching on the virtual platforms, this is how, just on the Android front, the reality looks like today. You look at an Android 10, which is running on a Google Pixel as a base stock OS, but then when you are installing or you are getting it on a Samsung device, it can be a Samsung Galaxy S20, or it can be actually on an Oppo Chinese device or on a Huawei device, which is quite popular in EMEA. You will see that this is no longer the same binary. It's no longer the same operating system running on the real device. And why is that important? Because when you are testing throughout the development lifecycle, you are trying to test as close as possible to your real end users. So when you're testing on a virtual platform, you will get a good stock OS of the Android 10. It's not always the case with the real version or the real custom version that is going to be live on the end user devices out there. So understanding the differences between base stock OS that is running on real devices, virtual devices, and the custom OS is key to understanding the fragmentation that is out there and the need for this kind of a strategy that combines both real, virtual, and so forth. But it's also, as we talked earlier, Tzvika, we talked about, the combination of devices and test cases as one testing strategy. And this is where the Agile testing manifesto comes into play and talks about, the value. Okay, do you want to cover the value or the aspect of value in regards to test coverage?
Yeah. So, guys, the Agile testing manifesto, during COVID times is even on steroids, if I may refer it like that. The reason is that, digital transformation is already given and requires organization to focus on value stream of their digital services, to understand where critical testing should happen, and the results of those test activities may resemble an action that should be taken by developers to debug issue or to improve performance or do any other step that is tied to value creation. If the test result, even if the test failed, does not provide any actionable or valuable insights about the operation of our digital service, it means that this test should be, literally discarded from the overall activity, and that we should focus our energy elsewhere. I would say the value question is something that each and every testing manager in his own silo or at the corporate level should look at nowadays, more than ever, as we're facing other challenges, and testing should become something that is driving the organization forward instead of being liability.
Definitely. And, if we tie that slide, Tzvika, to the fourth slide of this presentation, the two sides of the same coin, obviously, if you have visibility into your test reports and you see the test cases that are, not flaky, are stable, and they are driving good value, but also you measure that they are running on the right platforms, this is definitely what gives you, at the end of the day, the complete visibility and value. So with that introduction of, some of the market landscape from a mobile testing perspective and the definition of coverage, let's define, Tzvika, what are virtual platforms, to get started with.
So virtual devices are being represented by two main platforms. On the iOS side, we call those simulators, and they're running the same operating system as the real iOS devices would run. They simulate the majority of use cases and allow us to simulate the activity of an application over that device. From the nature of the OS architecture on the iOS side, there are activities at the system control level that are not accessible, and therefore the type of testing there is limited to some extent. When we look at the emulator side on the Android, we're talking about, again, similar imitation of a real device, but still an imitation of that, but with the more open garden approach, as the Google Android provides access to some system controls. For example, the ability to control battery performance, to imitate specific actions of the camera, and a couple of others that are unique or a little bit more advanced, I would say, on the Google side. Just from a quick glossary or difference between virtual and real device, the virtual devices are running on servers, on machines, and not on real devices. And that will lead us to the next slide and to some of the differences, the fundamental differences from an operation perspective between the platforms. We're talking about a major difference in the OS architecture, as I've mentioned. The trivial one would be the ARM versus the x86 chipset that accordingly require us to compile differently the applications that would run on the devices. There are implications to security aspects, the ability to run, for example, MDM solutions on those different platforms. The memory, of course, is different by nature of the architecture. So things that we want to test, for example, performance metrics that we would like to collect or other measurements over virtual devices may not resemble the real world behavior. And on the other hand, there are things that are more flexible on the virtual devices, the nature support of a new operating system that is given almost out of the box. So again, there are pros and cons for each and every side, but I would say in a nutshell that that leads us to the understanding that each and every type of these solution has its own rightful place within the overall software development lifecycle and the testing that is associated to that. So virtual devices by nature, because of those flexibility aspects, are a better fit for the early stages of our testing for the unit test level, the ability to make sure on a pull request level, if you like, that I didn't broke the build with some code changes that I may have done, within my mobile application, while the use of the real devices would come later on down the road as part of the regression levels and the need to get as close as I can as a tester to my customers, to my users, to the real end user condition, which requires more, I would say, advanced or sophisticated coverage requirements in terms of my test automation.
Thank you, Tzvika. And we won't dive into each and every row in this table, but after this webinar, you can definitely look at some differences between the two different platforms, iOS simulator and Android emulator, and you can understand that even for the virtual platform, per each operating system, there are differences, okay? Differences that are related to the architectural things, functionality differences, as Tzvika mentioned, and other testing type differences such as performance, vitals, and stuff like that. So it's important for you to understand, the scope of testing that is better utilized on a virtual platform versus the one that should be utilized, again, later in the cycle on real devices. And we'll provide you kind of a blueprint in the next couple of slides on where and how to use these different platforms.
I would make some kind of maybe an announcement early in this webinar, but something to consider, from the name of this webinar. Guys, the idea is really to consider the combo of the two, to find the golden path where virtual devices fit to specific types of testing, while the real devices complement those and uplift the level of testing in terms of coverage and the extended capabilities that can run only on real devices. One example would be the ability to test over cellular network. By nature, the virtual devices do not have SIM cards as they are virtual. We cannot test, specific scenarios of network conditions, and in some cases, we cannot even simulate those. So the need really to extend the coverage and get to a more advanced and real-world use case of test would come based on the real devices. So we will try, from here to draw the fine line that goes between the two and give the audience really here the notion when is the right time to use which type of platform and how the addition of virtual devices can actually extend and shift left some of the testing, allow better flexibility, and by that also maybe extend the ability to catch issues earlier in the process, given the flexibility of the virtual space.
Definitely, Tzvika. And the next two slides are actually, just to show a few things that, when you're testing, you're combining both virtual and real devices, you also need to take real care and attention to market trends, to what's happening in the market. So these are two or three examples that I picked from the App Annie, looking at specific issues. One of them is not testing on the right operating system, okay? In this complaint, a major upgrade that happened on iOS 13.4.1, revealed an issue with the Amazon application. Another coverage-related thing happened on the SiriusXM application. The latest update on the LG won't load anything. And you can see here a few other examples from Best Buy, for example, a specific device that doesn't work with the application. Why is that important? This is going back to our slide of strategizing your test automation coverage with both the scenarios as well as the platforms becomes, especially today, as Tzvika mentioned, we are living in a fully digital reality today, okay? Everything is done either through mobile or desktop web, and you need to make sure that your coverage is extended enough, testing things earlier in the process. For example, with this specific bug, testing it from the early beta versions to understand whether the application breaks or not, and so forth. The good thing, especially from Perfecto's side, Perfecto is on top of any new build, any new beta developer preview on Android, iOS, and any desktop browsers. We are announcing the same day support, so you can really get access to these platforms earlier and identify issues and avoid escape defects. Even if you're doing it perfectly well, we are still seeing things like that. So Perfecto is taking part in the COVID-19 testing, continuous testing efforts, and we were exposed to this unique bug on a OnePlus device that wasn't reproducible on most of the real devices, as well as on the virtual ones, but was unique to the OnePlus. A text was simply cut off from multiple screens of this React Native application. It's a known thing, actually. But, if you are developing an application that is global, global means that it can be used, on devices that are popular in China and sometimes also in EMEA, like the OnePlus and the Oppo. You really need to pay attention to these things. Stack Overflow is full with these kind of examples, and this is a unique device example or device bug that kind of is an exception to the strategy. You can do the testing on a lot of devices and on virtual ones, but still something may slip. So this is kind of an exceptional slide that I wanted to share because you don't see this kind of defects that often, so it's important for me to share. So before we are diving into the strategy, I think that this is an important thing in the context of testing on real devices and virtual devices. And this is touching the persona, okay? Tzvika started to talk about, the DevOps pipeline when you are starting to develop the new feature, the new functionality of your mobile application as a developer. Before you are doing the pull request and you're doing the code merges and stuff like that to the pipeline, handing it over to the SDETs and the QA engineers, you want to do some build acceptance testing and stuff like that. This is where, virtual platforms sometimes are very much beneficial to the developer. They are very quickly accessible, and they will provide enough or sufficient feedback in a low coverage kind of method before you can hand it over to the SDETs and also to the non-functional testing, as Tzvika mentioned, for performance testing, metrics, vitals. You do need real devices. So this can be, the different checkpoints, if you like, along the software iteration cycle where you mix and match the right platforms, the emulators and simulators used by the developer and sometimes also by the SDETs, and then combining with real devices from Android and iOS as you mature your coverage, your test automation scope, functional, non-functional testing, and more. In addition, we also, and Tzvika touched on that point as well, we also need to look at network conditions, right? Virtual platforms are not always able to really mimic, in most cases they aren't, okay? They cannot mimic the real network user experience on a mobile application. And you can see it here in the US, end of Q1 2020. These are the different variances between the different carriers on the upload experience, download experience, latency, 4G and 5G availability. These are things that impact the end user experience, the performance of the application. This is where you can actually understand where you can optimize things on your mobile app, so the end user experience obviously is enhanced. So I definitely recommend not just looking at this point as an important coverage or testing coverage consideration, but also bookmark this Open Signal website because it does give you some benchmark for you to test against different network conditions. Before I move to the next slide, Tzvika, do you have any comments on the last 3 slides on the strategy?
Yeah, so I would say test like your users becoming a leading theme. I've mentioned it already here, and the ability to get as close as we can to those metrics as part of our testing is key. So in this slide, what we can really see is the combo of multiple variables that we need to take under our coverage considerations. And we have conducted some survey and joint research with some of our customers about the use of virtual devices versus real devices. And we found out together that around 70% of the issues can actually be reproduced with virtual devices, while in real devices we'll be able to catch majority of them. So that leads me to kind of a conclusion or a recommendation that there is the right place and the right type of activity that can actually serve per each. So this is always kind of the balance between quality and velocity. The quality can be achieved with max coverage, taking under consideration all those unique profiles and the varying environment conditions that we need to take under consideration, while the virtual devices can provide us more flexibility, the ability to simulate more types of devices, more types of operating systems that we may not have in our physical real device lab in on-demand mode. And that is the kind of fine line between the two. Those testing coverage metrics that we see here are things that should be considered more over those real devices to make sure that before we release our application to production, we know that, for example, if I'm working in 5G, but suddenly I'm getting into a poor level of network condition, my app will still be running. The rate condition that may be created between my application and other applications that are running in the background may be issue as some of the phone resources may be limited, such as camera, GPS, and others. So we want to make sure that we combine all these items together, turn them into a structured testing plan that will allow us to achieve that coverage and get our service really bulletproof before we release it to production.
Awesome. And, if we connect that to the famous, I would say, test pyramid, this is, I just recently read a book, so everyone is obviously familiar with the test pyramid, dividing the unit test, integration test, and UI test. So I just recently read a nice post about kind of cutting in between this pyramid, the line between context and output, okay? And if you think about the different tools, the different objectives, the different, time constraints and stages within the DevOps cycle, you can think about that as the context, okay? The context is I have, let's say, a code commit or a pull request that I need to do. I need to validate my code changes as part of my unit testing activities. This is where, the output can be on, these dev-triggered devices, the emulators and the simulators. It's good enough. It's perfect. It gives me the fast feedback. It gives me the right feedback, actually, that I need. And then when I'm, changing the context, I'm expanding my scope of testing, because then I'm already in the integration phase, as you all know from this test pyramid. I have more content to cover, okay? I have more, integrations. I have more features to cover, more testing types to conduct. And this is where I need to do the right balance. As Tzvika mentioned earlier, you have things that you cannot cover on virtual platforms like performance testing, security, sometimes even accessibility features that aren't available on virtual platforms and only available on real devices. But on the other hand, you do have the unit testing or the acceptance testing that are good enough to run on virtual platforms. So you do want to have this stage in the process, in the pipeline, that combines both the virtual ones and the real ones, one complementing the other. Again, we are all serving the same purpose of high quality builds towards the nightly regression, the full regression cycle, and also the user experience validations that happen here in the end-to-end UI testing. That here, obviously, you do want to make sure that you are testing, as the previous slides suggested, against real user conditions, against real networks, real devices, real custom operating systems, like I mentioned earlier, with the Samsungs and the Huawei's and the other devices. So you get really the good feedback, and you are preventing escape defects, as we have seen a few slides ago on the App Annie website. Obviously, when you are monitoring production, it must be on real devices only, because this is what your end users are working on. And obviously, when you're doing production monitoring, you have these early alerts for you to really consider and fix issues before your end users sometimes even notice. So that's kind of the combo that Tzvika was talking about throughout the webinar, the combo of platforms, testing types within a single strategy, within a single pipeline that you can embrace. Anything to add on that, Tzvika?
Sure. So this slide, I think, is really key, and to the point that Eran and I are trying to make here. The infinite loop of DevOps that is on the right side of the slide is really talking about our ability to run faster, to release stable code faster, and to do, to mature the software release processes within our organization. The crunch that we see in the market today is happening mainly in integration test level. As not enough tests are being conducted between the unit test and the integration test level. That is the key, I would say, reason for escape defects that we see today within digital services. That issues are not identified early enough in the process, and in some cases, they may slip also to production. The ability to leverage virtual devices at this stage becomes a key or even a game changer, as we see that already happening with some of our customers. Upon each and every pull request, we can actually set a new quality gate that can run on a virtual device and prevent the no statement that I'm sure that all of the people on this webinar probably are familiar with, when someone sends an email asking who broke my build or who know what is the reason for a specific regression in our service or so on. So that becomes, a key, I would say, validation level at the smoke or acceptance level that allow us to verify whether the build is broken or not, and then promote the code, achieve higher level of stability, and then switch over, to a more real-world oriented testing. Again, test like your users, leverage the real end user condition based on real devices. Make sure that those valuable test cases that we talked about earlier from the Agile testing manifesto are really happening, and do not compromise on level of testing with unique scenarios like the performance testing that should really take under consideration the memory, the chipset, everything that happens on real device, like a user that holds the same device in his or her hand. Same goes for the manual testing, as we want to make sure that the UI is rendering properly and the overall experience is fit to what we'll actually get with real device. So only a combo of the two, as we're suggesting here, can allow organizations really to mature their DevOps processes to achieve higher level of quality and coverage without compromising one over the other.
And Tzvika, if you want to take, this is an example from our reporting. If you want to touch on that, on the test impact analysis showing both platforms in action.
Yeah, so another key factor for the ability really to fail fast, but also fix fast and accordingly ship stable code faster, is also the visibility to our testing. One of the things that we have witnessed over the last years is that testing is still siloed and happen in different views, in different dashboards or areas of the organization, and therefore cross-team collaboration is not really happening. As a developer, in many cases, I don't have access or visibility to things that QA is doing and vice versa. And the ability to combine all testing types into the same view, into the same environment, to be able to take both real and virtual devices testing, mash them together, and bring them to the same data lake, to the same environment, to the same visibility, reduces the time that it takes us to fix things. As we're sharing a single pane of glass, people have visibility and the ability to share with each other open defects and associate testing data accordingly, and save some time, and save also another common phrase, which is, I cannot reproduce that thing on my machine. And if we have the same visibility, and if I have access, besides just the dashboard, also to the artifacts that are tied to that test, like the logs and the vitals and the pickup and the HAR files, everything that is tied to the execution itself that may help me as a developer to actually debug this issue and then also validate it under the same conditions, becomes key. But the gateway for that is, again, the visibility, the dashboard, the analytics that allow me to conduct that quick slice and dice, to be able to really triage an issue and point my finger on an actual problem with my testing.
Great, thank you, Tzvika. So before we'll actually soon share a demo of the virtual platforms, let's try to conclude with a few recommendations. We talked about the test automation coverage. We talked about the combo within the test pyramid. We talked about the dashboard with the different test artifacts for test impact analysis, so you'll have a faster mean time to resolution. So if you want to summarize in 1 or 2 slides the considerations, so you want to look at the 4 kind of pillars here. The first one is the stage and activity in the software development cycle. Whether you are in the development cycle, you're in the testing phases like integration, end-to-end testing, regression, and stuff like that. Cost, we'll talk about cost separately, but definitely mixing virtual devices and real devices can be also a cost-efficient solution for any organization. And then coverage. We talked about coverage from both the platforms as well as the real user conditions and the different testing types that you can complete on both. So depending on the platforms that you want to cover, depending on the testing types that you want, and depending on the limitations that one platform has on top of the other, this will determine when you use each and every type of solution. The testing types here are broken also, and you will soon see them in a real pipeline example from one of our customers. So this is kind of a nice summary slide for how to break down the strategy for using both platforms, across the entire software iteration. To help you decide which platforms you want to actually use, especially from the real device perspective, Perfecto is providing a free asset, a free report, which is the Test Coverage Index, which is being released twice a year, giving you the most relevant recommendation of devices and operating systems as well as browsers to cover per each geography. We're covering over 10 different geographies, so you can, if you're supporting, like in the next slide, if you're supporting different geographies, different regions like the US and the UK, in this example, you will be getting the real device recommendations with the operating system as well as the different custom operating system version. So you can do a kind of a slice and dice and mixes between real devices, virtual devices, and devices that have different types of custom operating systems, like One UI 2 on the Samsung S9 and One UI on the Samsung S8. Okay, so this is just a few examples for you to consider. So if you haven't downloaded yet, the mobile device index, the test coverage index report, I recommend you to do so. It's really up to date with different geographies and can guide you around the right mix of platforms. Before we move to the demo, Tzvika, do you want to summarize with a real, I would say, what good looks like from a pipeline perspective, mixing both platforms?
Sure. Thank you, Eran. So just to refer to the coverage and the index, the importance in this section is to understand that coverage is not that complicated. The way that Perfecto really looks at it is from a mathematical standpoint and understanding of what is the optimized approach and coverage that meets each and every geography. And accordingly, we provide a subscription, a way that organizations, digital enterprises can consider as part of their coverage metrics, unless, again, there is a very detailed BI that can be used in order to determine coverage. And in majority of cases, we still see the adoption of this index as really the subscription with the track record of billions of test cases that are being executed based on these coverage metrics. To summarize, as you suggested, Eran, really the what good looks like approach in today's reality. If we think about the organization's will to run faster, to release code faster, especially in these digital kind of challenging times where we need to provide value and fast with our releases, we want to make sure that testing is complementing this need. And the way to do that is to base quality gates early in the process based on virtual devices where flexibility is important, and we have different operating system versions that we want to cover. We want to do that on demand because different developers will conduct pull requests in different times throughout the day. So the pull request would be the first quality gate where virtual devices can be leveraged, run a very simple and straightforward smoke test that can happen up to dozens of times per day and give us instant feedback whether the build is stable enough and we can promote it, or there is any issue that is identified early enough in the cycle. There is another layer that is evolving, and we see it more often these days, which is the midday kind of or noon build execution that is running some, I would say, more advanced smoke test that is running in a wider coverage and includes usually additional test cases to check the productivity of the first half of the day and make sure that before code is being handed over either to offshore teams by the end of the day or that other activities take place as part of the build cycle, we can have another quality check or quality gate for our code. And this is usually a place where a combo of real and virtual devices still may be applicable. On the next level, we have the regression, which runs nightly and over weekends would run in an extended mode usually on additional platforms that we don't have available often or with extended set of test cases. As mentioned earlier, those should fit to the end world condition, to the real user condition, in order to validate and avoid those scenarios where we miss a specific platform or miss the coverage of a specific operating system or functionality over a specific device or specific platform. That metric should include, items like the index, the right coverage consideration that we need to have in order to qualify the build and be able really to release it with a great level of assurance that our, code is stable and that risk was mitigated properly. So you can see that a mature DevOps process really, takes under consideration a true combo of virtual and real devices. We're shifting left some of the activity and creating new quality gates while we're making sure that we are maximizing the test automation coverage with real devices closer to production, closer to our users and the real kind of scenarios that we want to validate before we release our code.
Totally, Tzvika, and just a word about that slide because you covered it perfectly. Just so you understand from a visual perspective, you can see here on the pull request level, you see that there are small boxes, and obviously we build kind of confidence, quality confidence throughout the day, and you see the boxes becoming a bit bigger, and you can see here while the text is small, these are the test scenarios. In the middle you have the different platforms configurations, and then you have the environmental conditions that are critical in the mobile space. So obviously as you move towards the end of the day, the regression cycle that is marked here, and you are scoping towards the 80% or even more, the boxes are becoming a bit bigger, but also your confidence level is higher because you already conducted, as Tzvika mentioned, different quality gates throughout the day. Before I move to the demo of the virtual platforms, since Perfecto just announced the additional capabilities of testing on this mix of virtual and real devices, Tzvika, do you want to say just a word about the new offering of real devices alongside virtual ones?
Sure. So as we mentioned that we identified a growing crunch in the area of the integration test, Perfecto has introduced the support of virtual devices within our continuous functional test automation lab. That addition allows organizations to extend their automation and achieve those quality gates leveraging virtual devices. We support, of course, the latest and greatest from iOS 12 and above and Android 8 and above. We have on the Android side even a couple of foldable platforms that are supported to make sure that our coverage is really maximized. Any standard Appium script can run on a Perfecto virtual device with no hassle and with really superior performance to any other tool that is out there in the market. And we invite everyone to try us and witness the values of testing in the cloud. We're talking with many organizations these days that are struggling to maintain their own internal server farms given COVID implications. And we do see a true value by moving a lot of the activity that is happening early in the cycle at those pull request level to run over virtual devices with the extension of our offering in the cloud.
Excellent. Thank you, Tzvika. So we are going to now launch a live demo of running against virtual platforms using an Appium scenario, Appium script on the expense tracker that is running on both iOS simulators and Android emulators. If you need to get access to kind of a GitHub repository or get started with virtual platforms, you can contact us during and after the webinar, and also refer to our documentation portal, developers.perfectomobile.com, and learn more about these abilities. So let me launch the demo just right now. Okay, let's see how you can use virtual devices within the Perfecto cloud. In this project called the Virtual Devices, we have created two different scenarios. One of them is for iOS and the other one is for Android. Both projects are running on the expense tracker native application that Perfecto is providing. What we are doing, we are creating two different Gherkin BDD scenarios, the iOS simulator, which is running the iOS expense tracker, and the Android emulator, which is running the Droid expense tracker. These are the two methods here, okay? Given I run the iOS expense tracker and given I run the Droid expense tracker. We are also creating kind of an object repository that is specific for iOS and Android. You can see here the different XCUI elements that are being defined for the execution here, and also the Android elements that are defined in these methods. In addition, we are providing the targets in the test.ng XML file. Okay, you can see here for the iOS simulators, we are defining three different platforms. Okay, the main thing that you need to take under consideration, for example, you are defining an iPhone XS Max, but you need to also make sure to use this capability called Use Virtual Device True. You can see per each of the different three iOS simulators, we are using the Use Virtual Device as True for iPhone XS Max, iPhone 11 Pro, and an iPad Air 2. Same goes for the Android. You see 3 emulators used for the Android expense tracker with the use virtual device capability set to true. In the application properties, we are defining the credential for the cloud, the username, the security token, and this is the only thing that you need to do. It is a BDD quantum project within Perfecto with Appium underneath, configured for both iOS and Android. We're going to execute this test right now. Once the execution starts, you'll see all the different configurations are being populated. The application, the APK, and the app file are being installed as we speak on the virtual devices. Once these are being installed, we'll soon go to the live dashboard, live stream dashboard. You can see it here from the live stream. Once the driver is being opened, you will start seeing these platforms popping up. Now that the virtual devices are being loaded, for example, the iPad, and soon you will see the Android as well, you can actually go here and you can see as the platforms are being loaded into the live stream. You can also see the new tag called Mobile Simulator, which is different from a real device and a virtual one. You can click on the video for each device, and you can see that the expense tracker test is being executed on this device. So this is being executed. In parallel, you soon start seeing also the Android virtual devices, the Android emulators that are being populated. We'll give it a few more seconds. As the execution continues, you can actually already go to the report library, and you can see here, for example, a previous execution. It's exactly the same test. You can also see in the report library, again, the distinction between a simulator, a virtual device, and a real device, like a Google Pixel 4 that has just the word mobile. If you go to the, the iOS simulator demo, a previous execution that was done, you can actually see all the different steps that were executed on the virtual platform. You can actually also run the full video, the full recording, and you can see the full test being executed on the virtual device, step by step. So this is the recorded video for the iOS iPhone XS Max. So this is basically, the way to use Perfecto with virtual devices, both Android, iOS, running in parallel. In this case, we used Appium with Quantum BDD, TestNG as the data provider for the test. You can use it directly with just pure Appium, depending on your use cases and skills. So with that, I think we're able to show you the demo or how to actually run, an Appium script on virtual devices and real devices, both for iOS and for Android. As you can see, you can configure your platform to either be, through the TestNG, either be virtual ones or real or both, and obtain the feedback, slice and dice the data against our reporting dashboard. So that's basically what Perfecto is announcing. We are allowing you to maximize your test automation coverage, combining both real and virtual devices in a single lab, in a single solution, with a single report and dashboard, either through BDD and Quantum or clean Appium for your test automation activities. With that, I would like to conclude this webinar and leave the amount of time that is left for questions that are piling up. Before going to the question again, I just want to thank you, Tzvika, for joining me in this webinar.
Pleasure was all mine. Thank you very much, Eran.
Sure. And Shelby, do we have time for at least 1 or 2 questions before we wrap up?
Yep. The first question from the audience is, What role do the virtual platforms have in the overall Perfecto mobile testing solution?
So I'll take this one. I think, Shelby, and to the audience, that the importance of this addition, the virtual devices to the overall technology stack provided by Perfecto for testing is really, as mentioned, the ability to unlock the shift-left testing to start testing at scale and on demand early in the process, combine the ability to run both on virtual devices and real devices in one digital lab, as mentioned, with the right set of visibility reports and enterprise-grade solution that is secured enough, that is fast, and meets all the growing demand for digital testing in today's reality. The shift left is becoming key in order to identify issues early enough in the process, to be able to ship stable code faster, and really to achieve continuous testing with the right combination of the two worlds, the virtual and the real one.
All right, and the next question that we have is, what types of defects typically would escape when only testing on virtual platforms?
Sure, I can take that. Tzvika, feel free to join if you have any additional examples. So I think we have seen in this webinar, the path check application, we have seen some App examples, but if to summarize or to put these defects into buckets, I think that there are specific device issues. I've shown you the slide earlier in this presentation that most of the device OEMs, the device manufacturers, provide different custom OS on top of the Android specifically platform, and this can result in escape defects. Even if you are testing on the Samsungs and the Pixels, and you're testing on virtual platforms, early in the cycle and late in the cycle, there can still be escape defects due to these unique custom OS versions, which sometimes comes with different font types, like we've seen with the path check on OnePlus, or they're coming with a different UI engine and rendering engine that may interrupt or cause glitches in your native application. So device-specific issues are definitely among the escape defects that you cannot identify with virtual platforms, because there is a limit to the virtual platforms that you can test. Second, and Tzvika touched on that, is the real environment conditions. And this can be a wider bucket relating to UI, UX issues, performance, battery consumption or battery drain related stuff, and sometimes UI and functionality that sometimes is, slipping from virtual platforms and cannot be identified. So these are the main things that I'm seeing that are requiring real device testing. The coverage, covering as many device OS configurations, the UI, UX performance related stuff, and, if you have advanced features, advanced functionalities, and you are only relying on virtual platforms, obviously you cannot really identify all the different user flows, hence risking in escape defects. Anything to add on that, Tzvika, from your experience?
I think you are spot on around, the unique type of defects that would usually be found earlier in the process are more tied to the fundamental functionality, the service, some backend issues, while bugs and defects, over real devices would have a more unique flavor that is tied to a specific OS version, to a specific platform, to a specific use case that is more detailed in terms of the testing. And this breakdown or separation between different types of defects makes it easier for the tester to understand what type of test should be designed for each and every step, what type of functionality should be tested in order to qualify a specific scenario.
Great. Thank you, Tzvika. Shelby, do we have time for one more question, or are we done?
Yeah, we can fit one more question in.
Okay.
The last question will be, are there any recommended testing frameworks for mobile test automation that are recommended across real and virtual platforms?
So that's a good question. And, you know, when if I hear correctly the question, when you're looking at cross-platform, I would say that the de facto framework today that really can automate, and I think we've seen it in the demo earlier, is Appium. Appium is definitely the leading automation framework today that can, you know, run a script across both iOS and Android, both real devices and virtual devices. This is exactly what we demonstrated a few moments ago. So I would definitely vote for Appium as the cross-platform solution. If you are interested in testing unique features and functionalities on a single platform like iOS separately or Android, obviously then we are looking at Espresso versus XCUI test, which are more tied into these specific operating systems. But Appium, and you know, when you're dealing with Perfecto, you have Appium and you have Appium plus Quantum. So if you want to mix BDD scenarios, you can actually do it together with Perfecto. We support both the clean Appium and the Appium with Quantum, as well as Espresso and XUI test as a side note. But these are the top frameworks today that we are seeing and we are recommending to test across mobile platforms. So,
of course, I think, Eran, we invite, you know, this great audience, you know, to give it a try, to see how simple and easy it is to combine both platforms in the same lab. We'll be happy to support, you know, any kind of question or in-depth information that is needed on how to leverage virtual devices alongside real devices. And starting with Appium, which is still, as you just mentioned, still, you know, the leading framework association for testing across multiple types of platforms. And again, we're here to help in any possible way, and happy really to announce now that our virtual devices platforms are available for all.
Thank you, Tzvika. Thank you again for joining. And if you want to get started, as Tzvika mentioned, with virtual devices, simply go to perfecto.io under Solutions. You will find a tab called Emulators and Simulators, where you can learn and actually get your own dedicated demo, learn more about the platforms, learn how to connect Appium with virtual devices like I demonstrated earlier. So with that, I would like again to thank you, Tzvika, for joining me. Thank you, Shelby, for hosting us. And I'm really excited about these new abilities and looking forward to seeing you all in the next webinar.
Thank you.